Well, it's time to see how exactly the forging of the Dwarven Rings plays out, as episode 5 starts us off in Khazad-dum, where the rings have been forged and delivered to King Durin, all of them. Something which we'll take note of because I'm not sure why Sauron didn't spread the rings among the dwarves instead of leaving it to King Durin, who takes one of the 7 rings and quickly becomes enchanted with it as though he can already feel its power, and we're about to find out what exactly that power is. As he heads down to a dig site to meet with Na'vi, where he's told they've been attempting to dig a new access shaft to reach the sunlight, which has only made the mountain more unstable, but what Na'vi doesn't realise is that the king is about to fix that problem. He stops and looks around, leading Durin and Na'vi to the mountain wall where we're shown the ring has told him to dig in order to reach the sunlight. He tells Durin to dig and is told that this is a foundation wall, meaning if they dig there, there'll be a cave-in. So I would expect Durin to quickly stop him, but instead shows himself to be spineless when his and the other dwarves' lives are at risk. Durin refuses his father's orders to dig, so the king demands his axe.
You fucking coward.
You're gonna hand it over just like that when you know what taking the wall down will mean. So I'd expect a little more pushback before the king kills everyone. But all we're given is Durin ordering the other workers away, not only for their safety but because of the king's behaviour. Which isn't normal for him. He's usually not one for taking risks, as we've seen from season 1 when he shut down the Mithril mine after one cave-in. But of course we're supposed to take it as the ring telling him to do so without any hesitation. Which is strange when he's only just received the ring, so if it was telling him this, surely he would have some doubts? Unless the ring is doing something else to him, which we'll eventually get to. So this has apparently worked. This isn't a foundational wall then? I guess not. We see the king walk through Khazad-dum, pinpointing places to dig, which finally brings back sunlight to their mountain. And we're given a speech from the king that doesn't make much sense. Maybe he doesn't know how the sun works? He says they should pity those who dwell above because they're slaves to the sun, chained to its ceaseless rhythm of waking and sleep, that in Khazad-dum they're free of its tyranny and they bring the sun to them.
Everyone who is someone is lining up to smoke crack.
No. You're also a slave to the fucking sun. That was your entire problem. You're reliant on it for its light to grow your crops because you didn't have the common sense to farm outside. You've been working tirelessly to reach the sun for weeks, so the idea that you're not a slave to it exactly like everyone else is, well, it's fucking moronic. But the dwarves have finally solved their problem, although not really because they're still lacking in food, which has been the biggest problem. So there's not much to celebrate yet. We're also given Deeza's reaction to this, which seems to be worrisome, and I don't know why when it's her that wanted this. Unless she's realising she's now out of a job because she's no longer necessary for digging. When for the moment at least, she should be happy about this when you consider how scared she was about their situation. So if you're going to plant any doubts in her mind, this is way too early, because now she just comes across as a little bit selfish. But that takes us over to Eregion, where the elves and dwarves are celebrating the rings and their newfound relationship. And in the spirit of that, Celebrimbor presents them another gift.
The Doors of Durin.
So this confirms how fucking useless and brainless the writers are. The Doors of Moria weren't built like this, but built into the fucking mountain itself. Why would this be something that would ever make sense? How would Celebrimbor get this massive rock here, somehow get it into the forge itself, sculpt the doors and expect the dwarves to carry it all the way back to Khazad-dum? With what? I don't know. All I do know is how stupid this is. Celebrimbor toasts their friendship and notices Sauron looking disappointed and walking off. So Celebrimbor joins him on the balcony where Sauron is annoyed he didn't keep the celebration short like he told him to. He goes on to ask Celebrimbor's forgiveness, saying he finds it difficult to stay festive when those affected most by Mordor's rise are still suffering. Celebrimbor quickly realises Sauron is talking of the rings for men, which he denies for some reason. When it was obvious what was being implied, why is Sauron the world's worst manipulator? It's usually a good idea when you're trying to manipulate someone, they don't know it. And if Sauron's goal here is to trick Celebrimbor into making rings for men, why is his plan to run off and stand sad and alone in the corner? When surely it works better if you're more subtle, gradually giving hints, even though I was sure Celebrimbor was already on board with this idea. That was until now.
It is a game you play, sowing seeds in others' minds and then convincing them that the fruit is of their own thought.
So all of a sudden, Celebrimbor knows he's being manipulated. He never realised all the obvious signs that were there before, like Sauron's story of Galadriel casting him out when she found out who he really was, which doesn't make sense when you consider he told Celebrimbor he was sent by the Valar. If that was true, why would she cast him out? This also confirms that Celebrimbor wasn't under any spells from Sauron. He's in fact a gullible fucking twat. This is the first time since Sauron revealed himself as Anatar that Celebrimbor has refused to do what he wants. In episode 3, he went as far as sending a letter of lies to Gil-galad so they could continue to make rings, which Celebrimbor was told he was forbidden to do so. Which also should have raised questions of why would Gil-galad want to prevent Middle-earth from being saved, but Celebrimbor has questioned nothing. He went along with it until now he won't. Why? Who the fuck knows? Sauron questions whether Celebrimbor has had a change of heart concerning the rings for men, something he doesn't want to talk about but is forced to.
Much of the misery of men is of their own making.
That's very funny to think about when you consider all the misery that's been caused in Middle-earth has actually been caused by the elves themselves. We had Gil-galad trick Elrond into spying on the dwarves for Mithril, which ultimately led to Durin and his father's estrangement. And then we have Galadriel, the big bad of Rings of Power, who has and will cause the most misery to all the races because she didn't tell Celebrimbor Halbrand was Sauron. But to make his point, Celebrimbor mentions that it was the men of the Southlands that helped Adar in his conquest. Which really isn't that great of a point when A, most of them didn't, which Sauron tells him, and B, the people who did help Adar were scared into doing so because they didn't want to die. A much better point to go for would be men are more corruptible in reference to them serving Morgoth. Sauron goes on to talk about Numenor, saying it's the place he fears most and had hoped their rings would make Numenor stable. But Celebrimbor is still convinced the risk of corruption is too great and might create more problems than it would solve. To which Sauron argues, although there's frailty in men, there's also those a lot stronger than the rest. So his proposal is that they find men they can trust, which doesn't necessarily throw the corrupting aspect away just because they're trustworthy. Sauron says they should seek out the wisest, most noble and purest of heart from Numenor to Rhûn and identify 9 ring bearers of the 9 greatest mortal kingdoms, whatever those kingdoms are. The only ones we've been introduced to is Numenor and the Southlands, which isn't exactly a kingdom. This has been another failing on Rings of Power's part that we don't know any other kingdoms of men, or even dwarves for that matter. We've got Numenor, but that's in Numenor. Why don't we have the perspective of men from Middle-earth outside of some dirty fucking villagers? I don't know why they expect me to care about Middle-earth when I know nothing about the kingdoms and different people in it. Why would I give a shit about Sauron corrupting them when I don't know who they are? Maybe we could spend more time on that rather than wasting time with the fucking Harfoots and the dirty villagers in Pelargir with their go-nowhere plot. Sauron proposes they make 9 rings for the next forging and is quickly turned down.
My answer is no.
I shall make the 9 myself.
It does make you wonder that if Sauron has played a part in the forging of the Dwarven Rings, then surely he knows what he's doing now, so doesn't need Celebrimbor. We're supposed to assume Sauron can't do it without him, but at the same time, at some point down the road, Sauron is going to make the one ring on his own in secret, so why doesn't he yet have the ability to craft the rings for men without Celebrimbor unless Sauron is just that slow to learn? And why doesn't he just mind control Celebrimbor to do what he wants when it's been established Sauron is in a hurry to create the rings? Instead, it seems he's gonna fuck around trying to trick Celebrimbor into helping him rather than just use his fucking powers. But that's something we'll eventually come back to. As we cut away to Numenor to see the effects of Pharazon becoming king after an eagle voted for him. Pharazon wonders if Kemen has ever seen the Tower of Eresia, which is the gateway to Valinor, and can only be seen from a certain peak on their island, believing the elves put it there on purpose, so that every sunset serves as a reminder that their days must end and the elves never will. This just reeks of insecurity a cartoonish amount. To believe the elves gifted you this island for helping them, and to then secretly give you a middle finger by putting a peak in a certain place to remind you you're gonna die and they're not. That doesn't seem like a reasonable position for Pharazon to take. I could understand him being jealous, but not full-on paranoia. The reason for this is to establish that Pharazon doesn't just want to rule Numenor, he also wants to be immortal. And that's a motivation we're only just finding out about in Season 2. We've never heard about this before, it's an entirely new detail that the writers invented at the last minute. Pharazon goes on to tell Kemen that when he was born, his mother prophesied that he would come to ill ends. Why he would tell his son something cruel his mother said about him, I'm not sure. He decides not to finish the story, saying that if Kemen impresses him in the task he's given, he'll tell him. Because finding out why your own mother said you die horribly is definitely a motivating factor. We then cut over to a now dethroned Miriel who hears the people of Numenor chanting Pharazon's name. I guess that's something they just do randomly. Elendil assures her that there's people who still support her, and if she commands them, him and the Sea Guard who remain loyal can put it right. Why is this a belief he has when Pharazon was chosen by the Eagle, and as we now know, an Eagle has final say over all political matters?
Why?
I don't know. I don't know.
Why?
What?
Elendil continues to try and convince her to fight and wonders why she doesn't want to. He gets no response as Miriel moves on to ask him what he's seen in the Palantir, which I'm surprised he had enough time to see anything considering it threw him across the room. Elendil's vision of the future was seeing himself riding away from the city, which I would assume means he's going to leave Numenor. Because of this new vision from the Palantir, Miriel makes some pretty big and retarded leaps. She tells Elendil that not every battle must be fought to one, sometimes maintaining the stillness of heart is the greatest victory and act of faith one can perform. So commands Elendil to do nothing no matter what they take, he mustn't jeopardise Numenor's new destiny, because she believes Pharazon becoming king is a part of that new destiny.
Dumb bitch.
The problem in her thinking here is she isn't accounting for any of the different factors with the Palantir. She seems to be under the impression that the Palantir shows everybody the exact same thing. Because if I was in Miriel's shoes and I was told by Elendil he had a different vision from mine, I would assume that the Palantir showed people different things based on their own futures. I wouldn't assume the opposite. Although, saying that, when Galadriel touched the Palantir in Season 1, it showed her the same vision as Miriel's. And I'm starting to think maybe the writers forgot that because now it's very obvious the Palantir has shown Elendil his own future as opposed to Numenor's future. Because based on Pharazon's actions that we'll soon reach, Numenor's downfall is still something that's on its way. So the Palantir is not only inconsistent with Season 1, Miriel is also a fucking clown for believing what Elendil saw isn't unique to him, which she's now basing all of her actions on. When even if you knew Galadriel's seen what you saw, that's obviously not the case now. But this thought has not crossed her mind because, like everybody else, she's an idiot. We then cut away to the docks to find the Sea Guard handing over their uniforms, which is going to cause more problems for Pharazon than it'll solve.
Anyone deemed loyal to the Queen Regent has been stripped of rank.
So we don't yet know if Pharazon has allowed his son to make this decision or if he made it himself. But this is a very incompetent thing to do because it's only going to turn people against Pharazon. First of all, you're stripping the ranks from the Sea Guard, which is essentially your army, people that you need. Second of all, these are people's brothers, sons and fathers, which already turns a large chunk of people against you. Then we have the people who respect the Sea Guard, especially after going to war, some of which their family members died in. So it's incredibly disrespectful to those that died and served, which is how most of Numenor would see it. So that turns even more people against you, and the reason these decisions are being made is because the writers don't understand how oppression works. Generally, when you want to suddenly oppress a group of people, for example World War II, you have to convince the majority of your country gradually through propaganda to turn against the group of people you want to oppress. You don't just turn up and oppress them because it won't work. Especially when that group, which is the Faithful, also have members that fought in a war for you. So this makes Pharazon incredibly incompetent, someone who's been shown to have the ability to win people over simply with his words. Instead, we've got this bullshit.
On whose authority?
On mine.
That's right, Eregion, who was only an architect not long ago, now has the authority to disband the Sea Guard. Something she does with a smug smile on her face when the Sea Guard includes her father. She tells Elendil she hoped to tell him sooner and that Lord Belzegar wanted the lot of them charged with treason. So Belzegar's also a fucking moron. They haven't done anything treasonous yet. I don't know why they keep trying to run before they can walk. Elendil wonders if Eregion overthrew the Queen for a promotion, which she claims she'd done out of grief and not ambition, and that her brother's dead because Miriel peeped into an Elfstone. And Elendil for some reason doesn't state the obvious thing he should, that Miriel tried to save Isildur. I don't know why that information isn't out there already, but that should be Elendil's response. Instead, he takes issue with Eregion mocking the Palantir and the beliefs of the Faithful, which she calls absurd, and begs Elendil to accept Pharazon as king because he's walking a treacherous path. He decides to hand over his sword due to what Miriel commanded him to do, that whatever they take, to let them. He's then saluted by his men, which Kemen points out isn't their captain anymore, which Elendil agrees with. Yet Valandil salutes him nonetheless. Elendil leaves and Eregion approaches Valandil, saying she might be able to have him taken off the list of those losing their jobs. Saying he's one of her oldest friends, yet her father can go fuck himself.
I think you've made it clear enough who your friends are.
She seems to have the inability to read the room. He's clearly loyal to Elendil, so why would he care what you can do or have to say? Not only is she quickly contradicted herself, she's also said this in front of Pharazon's son. Which just leads me to question whether you actually believe in what you're doing if you're happy to play favourites. I'm also questioning your IQ because you could end up in the same position if Pharazon hears about this. Who, before we leave Numenor, approaches the Palantir. What he intends to do with it, I guess we'll find out later. As we're taken back over to Lindon, where Gil-galad has received Celebrimbor's message, somehow. This is something that isn't possible when you consider the multiple problems with this letter reaching Lindon from Eregion. First of all, why would Sauron want Celebrimbor to find out about the broken bridge? Because that's the way the messenger would go, the fastest route. Leading him back to Eregion to tell Celebrimbor, and him realising that's why he hasn't heard anything from Gil-galad. Which is the entire reason Sauron convinced you into letting him into Eregion, because you thought nobody gave a shit about you. And if we assume the messenger carried on to the Barrow-downs rather than reporting back to Celebrimbor, the messenger should have bumped into Elrond, or if not, been killed by the Barrow-wites. And the Barrow-downs is the only way the messenger would have gone, because the only other route takes 2 weeks, so Gil-galad wouldn't have received this message that quickly. So none of this makes any sense, and it's about to make less sense.
As requested, the forge is dark, and the workshop is empty.
So that should already raise suspicion for Gil-galad, because he didn't request the forge to be shut down, because why the fuck would he? But Celebrimbor was stupid enough to believe Sauron and thought that Gil-galad wouldn't want him to forge other things aside from rings, even after investing in the forge being built. So Celebrimbor, in his attempt to stall Gil-galad, didn't consider that it would only rush him to Eregion because it's suspicious. The letter continues saying there's a calm in Eregion and he hopes Gil-galad can visit. So this is just an all-around suspicious message to receive. Not once has Celebrimbor responded to what Gil-galad told him about Halbrand being Sauron, but instead went into the closing of the forge, which Gil-galad never once told him to do in his letter. So this should come across as more of a warning that Sauron is in Eregion and Celebrimbor wants help. Gil-galad, however, doesn't realise this. His reaction tells me he's thinking, should I be suspicious of this? When it's fucking obvious. It isn't obvious at all for one of Gil-galad's commanders, who tells him their armada is ready to leave for Mordor and wonders what Gil-galad's waiting for.
All is well in Eregion. The letter proves Galadriel was wrong.
Is that what you think?
I'm not sure if we've encountered a bigger retard than this. What do you mean, all is well in Eregion? None of what was in Celebrimbor's letter proves Galadriel was wrong. It proves the complete opposite. Celebrimbor responded to nothing Gil-galad said. He claimed he shut down the forge like Gil-galad wanted him to, though Gil-galad didn't say that. You know Sauron needs Celebrimbor, and you've still yet to hear back from Elrond. You can't possibly believe this proves Eregion is safe and somehow risen to the ranks of commander at the same time. What a clown you really are. She goes on to say that whilst they hesitate, Adar's army grows stronger and that if they're to invade, they need to leave now. This, by the way, is the same woman in episode 2 who told us she had spies who seen Sauron enter Mordor. And now her spies, for some reason, haven't told her that Mordor has now been emptied of orcs. So you're literally going to show up to nothing but Glug's wife breastfeeding his little evil baby. When if your intentions are to invade Mordor, the logical thing to do would keep spies in that area to warn you of any changes or strange movements. Things that you need to know in order to strategize and come up with a plan to beat them. This just doesn't make any sense. Eregion is more important than Mordor, and you should know that's where they're going. But I guess if they did that, there'd be less tension, so why not make them retarded? Which seems to only continue after Gil-galad has a vision and she tells him that their enemy is in Mordor even though they're not, and asks whether he's prepared to wager the future of Middle-earth on the whispers of that ring alone. You don't need the fucking ring for that, you have a literal letter which is nothing but suspicious. That's all you need to decide whether to go to Eregion or not. I've never heard such nonsense. We then cut away to Elrond making his way to Lindon with a sense of urgency he severely lacked on the way to Eregion, even going as far as to throw his cape to the floor to gain more speed. Because I assume he's well aware he needs to make it back to Lindon before the episode ends. And that returns us to Khazad-dum, where Disa is concerned about the king's newfound power. Durin reminds her that it was in fact her that pushed for this, so I'll reiterate that these thoughts have come way too early. The king only just started using the ring, we're yet to see any bad side effects. Disa's reasoning is that learning to hear the mountain is a gift, one that's honed and refined over a lifetime, whereas this feels like cheating. As if that matters when you were in a terrible situation that the ring has now got you out of. This really does come across as bitterness. If we had seen the side effects from the king at this point, I would understand, but that hasn't happened yet. The only person I could accept feeling this way and not trusting its power is Durin, because he was the one who didn't trust the rings to begin with. But now him and Disa have completely flipped to different sides. Durin says that he thinks his father knows a thing or two about wielding power, which isn't the impression I was given this season. Disa prays that the king's path remains true because she believes this kind of power would test even the most virtuous of dwarves. We then cut over to Durin and Disa in a Khazad-dum market where Disa hopes to buy a tuning stone, which they find has now gone up in price. I thought they didn't have any money. The original price seems to usually be 100, whatever their currency is, and has now gone up to 200. For reasons we're about to find out.
I blame the king's new law. For every coin spent, another goes to the crown.
What the actual fuck? So King Durin has raised taxes by 100%. Is he insane? Because I think he might be. When you consider his people already had a rough time after the explosion of Mount Doom, this is only going to piss people off and turn them against you. But I think this confirms the ring is already affecting his mind, but why would that be the case? Well, that's something we'll talk about in one of the next scenes. The shopkeeper wants 200 for the tuning stone, and this is apparently how stupid Disa is.
We'll give you 100, 150.
I'll give you $50 if you take off your top and you drink soup out of my shoe.
Bitch, do you not know how money works? Apparently not. If the king has raised taxes by 100% and the tuning stone was originally 100, then that means the price has to go up to 200 so the shopkeeper can profit. Assumedly for feeding his family, and your first offer is 100, which means he makes fuck all. Your second offer, although better, doesn't mean shit because he's still gonna lose money. Not only does this reduce Disa's intelligence, it makes her look a little bit scummy when the shopkeeper is trying to make ends meet to feed his family. He has no other option but to charge this much. For some reason, he decides to accept 150, and I think I know the reason.
No, I don't.
This is obviously going to lead to something very important that the writers couldn't figure out how to get it to happen, so just decided to say fuck it and give Deezer a temporary case of Butterfingers. And one thing to note here is the tuning stone has a massive chunk bitten out the side of it, which means this would stop it from rolling. So what's about to happen makes less sense. It continues to roll through all of these alleyways and eventually stopping by the edge of the water, where Deezer uses her singing powers to pinpoint where it is, even though she was right beside it. So this is what the thread of unbelievable things led to, the Balrog being discovered. Deezer had to drop the ball and it had to somehow roll all the way through alleyways and in caverns directly into this cave, even with a massive chunk out the side of it, and then stop right at the water's edge where Deezer turns blind for a second, sings, and the Balrog responds. Why exactly has the Balrog not done anything yet when it was woken up in Season 1? Surely once it's awake it would just start fucking shit up, but no, it just seems to be kicking back, waiting for some human contact. You would have thought the market being this nearby to the cave, the Balrog would have already been discovered, but no. So I guess we'll see how this new information affects things going forward. For now we're returning to King Durin, who's invited emissaries of the Seven Dwarven Kingdoms to Khazad-dum. He tells them these rings are for their masters and to go back and tell them that each of their realms can share in this bounty, but it comes with a price. So now you understand why we made a note of King Durin having access to all the rings. If Sauron wants all the Dwarf Lords to have one of these rings, and he obviously knew this would happen to the king, who's now holding the rings hostage, why did he not require that all the Dwarf Lords be there to avoid this from happening, and ensuring your rings, and ultimately control, extends its reach? And why is King Durin already being affected this badly by the ring, because this news is obviously going to reach Celebrimbor, who would definitely become suspicious of you if he found out the ring turned the king into a comically greedy idiot, which shouldn't be happening until Sauron has forged the One Ring, but regardless of that, this is really incompetent if he wants Celebrimbor to continue forging rings, in particular for men. We then find the king telling Na'vi he wants to dig deeper, saying there's gold beneath their feet. He wonders who set the restrictions, forgetting that it was himself decades ago, so tells Na'vi to strike them anyway. And as he's about to come up with an excuse, he's told if he doesn't strike them, the king will, because he's lost the fucking plot. He clearly set those restrictions because, as we've been over, he's not one for taking risks. And that's when you start to realise the king's about to be reduced to nothing more than a husk of what a character is supposed to be. He's already, after having the ring for one day, corrupted by it, and that's about to become very clear.
What is it? What have you done with it?
It's there, sire. You took it off.
Yep, he's gone full Gollum. Durin eventually bursts in and tells him about the Balrog, although he doesn't know exactly what it is. All he knows is that it's evil, ancient, and powerful. The king completely ignores this fact and tells Na'vi to start digging anyway, which makes no sense if the king is corrupted or not, because the Balrog is something that will prevent you from gaining your riches. And if the people were to find out that he didn't give a shit, that pushes you further to being overthrown. I don't know why the ring also makes you retarded, or why it would even affect you this badly after only having it for no more than a couple of days, as opposed to gradually over time. We could even have the king trying to fight it and sometimes doubtful of it, which is a lot more interesting to watch rather than being completely taken over with it. Rings of Power makes it so that if we were to accept that in this universe Frodo would eventually go on his journey with the One Ring, he'd be annihilated by it as soon as he touched it. Because if the Dwarven Ring does this, I can only imagine how bad the One Ring would affect someone. The king goes on to claim that stone singers can hear the mountain, but he can now see it. So that's why he knows where to dig for gold, jewels and ore, yet he can't see a massive fucking Balrog. Why would the ring, or Sauron, want to hide that exactly if he wants to rule over all kingdoms? We're just left to assume the king is greedy and that all he wants to see is the riches within the mountain. So he's just been completely wiped from the show as a character. There's nothing left, which is just fucking lame. He concludes that what Deezer believes she's seen or heard, she was simply mistaken, because that's apparently something you can make a mistake about.
There is no danger. I am the danger.
And that's the end of that, I guess, so I expect Sauron's going to come under suspicion by the time this reaches Eregion. And that's, as it happens, where we're off to next, where we find Sauron testing the rings for men. Even though this is fucking Celebrimbor's workshop, he's allowed Sauron to use it when he himself believes men would be corrupted by the rings. I don't understand why, when Sauron claimed he'd make the 9 himself, Celebrimbor didn't tell him he should do it elsewhere. He's just been given free reign, not only with his workshop, but his employees too. The workshop eventually falls into chaos after attempting to resize the ring, and one of the workers has gone invisible. And after being saved by Celebrimbor, she comes back in a traumatic state because she witnessed the unseen world, claiming to have been in a place just like this but shrouded in mist and darkness, saying she saw a tall entity with skin made of flame reeking of death.
I think it's been here. I think it's been here among us all along.
So this is obviously Sauron's true form that she saw, although she doesn't realise this. Which is kind of strange when it would be standing where Sauron stood. She luckily doesn't consider that. I don't know why she would even be putting on the ring, because surely this is not something Sauron wanted anyone to see. Celebrimbor questions what they did differently with this particular ring, and is told Sauron shared his worry about men being more corruptible, so thought that if they added more mithril, that it might fix that problem. What a fucking stupid idea. If men were already easily corrupted, putting in more mithril would only make it worse. It then becomes clear Sauron was incompetent on purpose.
Oh, no. If you'd wanted to do that, you should have...
So this was apparently his attempt to manipulate Celebrimbor, and what an absolute shit plan it was. When Sauron himself should understand what he's doing if he's worked alongside Celebrimbor, so shouldn't have the dumb idea of adding more mithril. So he's in fact making it obvious he did this on purpose, but even though Celebrimbor is aware, as we've seen in their first scene this episode, when he said he knew he was being manipulated, now all of a sudden he doesn't realise it. Or he does, as he was just about to give them advice, pulling him back in. But before he has the ability to, they're interrupted by the guards of Eregion announcing that Durin has come to talk about the rings. He tells Celebrimbor his father has changed due to the ring, and that he's colder and quicker to anger, and that he refuses to share the other rings unless the Dwarf Lords promise him half a share of their mines. We really are just falling into insanity, aren't we? I really don't know why the ring has made the king this stupid. He's turning his own people against him based on his taxes, his ignorance of the Balrog, and refusing to give the other rings. And Sauron, who should have predicted this outcome, didn't ensure the rings were spread among the dwarves to ensure he gets full control. And again, this isn't an outcome Sauron should want because it will only raise suspicion. So the rings shouldn't be affecting the king this early, because if the other dwarf lords realise this, they won't want the fucking rings. So it's very important nobody knows until you've made the one ring. Because all it takes is word getting around about magical rings corrupting people, even to the race of men, and it kills your entire plan. Sauron hasn't thought about any of this. Durin says that greed has never been his father's way, and that if it's possible, the ring is affecting him. Only to be told a swift no from Celebrimbor because he can't accept that his work could ever come into question. He's basically just being a prideful prick. When it's obvious that if someone's personality completely changes and they recently were given a magical ring, then it's probably the fucking ring.
We used the same process, the same materials, even the same tools as for the 3.
That isn't exactly true though, is it? There's one ingredient the writers have completely forgot about, and that is...
I need gold and silver of the most exquisite quality. I need gold and silver from Valinor.
And that is a crucial element to the process, only it isn't possible you still have that particular material. That's the entire reason why they had to use Galadriel's knife, because gold and silver from Valinor is not at all common in Middle-earth. It's in fact in Valinor, which you can't go to and they can't leave, to provide you that material. So no, you did not use the same process, and that isn't your fault, that's the brainless writer's fault. Durin goes on to question how much he really knows about Anatar, believing the problem is with the Ringmaker himself. And we see Sauron watching with that typical evil look on his face. Why does he keep doing that? I'm honestly not sure. He must want people to know that he's evil. That's the only reason you would ever have that look. We then cut over to Sauron comforting Medania after she witnessed the unseen world, saying that some who see it are never quite at home in this world again. And it's something he didn't want her to see, which, if that was true, you wouldn't have let her put it on her fucking finger. He goes on to tell her that the frightening creature she saw was in fact Celebrimbor.
What?
And she just believes him. He says that creating the rings has taken a toll on Celebrimbor and left him vulnerable to the shadow. And he makes her promise not to tell anyone because he's attempting to heal him, and she's just completely bought into it. That somehow Celebrimbor is this terrifying creature even though he wasn't in the room and there are no signs there's anything wrong with him. Sauron clearly hasn't considered Medania could go and just talk to him and find out, and at the same time find out you're telling lies about him. So this isn't a great strategy, but I guess we'll have to wait and find out why he's told her this. We then cut back over to Numenor, where Elendil and the rest of the faithful are honouring those who died in Middle-earth, until they're interrupted by Kemen, who tells them the shrine is being condemned. His reasoning behind it is that it's in the way of a new aqueduct. Which of course isn't the truth of it, it's also the worst time he could have done this. One of the big reasons people were angry with Miriel was because of the massive loss they had in terms of soldiers, people's family members. And when they now hear you interrupted a memorial for those people, you're going to continue to turn them against Pharazon. For now, it doesn't look great, but it's going to become much worse of a situation. When one of the faithful tries to retrieve a relic and is stopped from doing so, Elendil commands Kemen to give it to him and at the same time calling him boy. He obviously doesn't like that, so smashes the relic to pieces, because of course he does. I don't know what Elendil expected, he should have just picked it up himself.
Hold him.
Well, it's good to see the Numenorian guards are still incompetent at their jobs. I don't know why they had to be told to hold him. But then again, they were outsmarted by one 5-foot elf. Kemen then decides to throw a punch and is quickly stopped by Valandil.
Kings may not welcome here.
I don't see you praying.
Yeah, you just interrupted us. Valandil goes on to attack him and the guards do nothing, by the way, except stand there. And somehow Kemen gets the upper hand. This streak of piss somehow manages to hold Valandil under the water for longer than he should. Valandil, the trained and muscular soldier, just can't get out of this until he does, which he shouldn't have had any problem with. So Kemen decides to bring his sword to a fistfight and gets his arm broken. How can the guards still have not got involved? They seem to be too busy beating the other people or standing around when their prince almost got himself murdered. Valandil decides to stop and throws down the sword beside Kemen, turns his back, and gets stabbed. For fuck's sake. First of all, why would Valandil throw the sword beside Kemen instead of in the water when he's clearly angered him, so this is an obvious possibility? Why didn't he hear the sword being picked up, and why the fuck didn't Elendil see Kemen when he was in his direct line of sight? None of this makes any sense. It makes both Elendil and Valandil incompetent, and therefore a worthless death. This is also a massive fuck up on Kemen's part. When the people of Numenor hear the story of you interrupting a ceremony honouring the fallen soldiers, destroying relics, the guards beating the faithful, and Kemen himself killing one of them, that is not going to sit well. This could have been done so much more intelligent and peacefully. One way would be to condemn the shrine when nobody was there, not in the middle of a funeral, which the people of Numenor would be fine with, even glad to see when it was to honour their family members. Pharazon has now become the obvious aggressor here, turning people against him as opposed to the faithful. Kemen tells the guards to take Elendil away and to inform the jailer it was him who started the uprising. What uprising? I know the writers think they can cover this entire situation up, but you can't. There's way too many witnesses, so word will eventually spread about what happened here, whether they like it or not. But that returns us to Eregion, where Celebrimbor tells Sauron there's something wrong with the Dwarven rings. Sauron's response is that maybe King Durin is misusing his ring and looking to place blame, which Celebrimbor doesn't believe. How could he possibly be misusing his ring unless he's sticking it up his arse instead of putting it on his finger? And how would misusing the ring change his entire personality? Doesn't make a lot of sense.
Just be mindful someone is not manipulating you.
That's literally something he accused you of at the start of the episode, which he suddenly forgot apparently. Why does Sauron constantly risk himself being discovered when it's in his best interest not to draw attention? Celebrimbor finally asks if he altered the rings.
No. We did.
Sauron's reasoning behind this is that making the rings is a matter of spirit just as much as craft, and this time they brought deceit into the process, blaming it on Celebrimbor lying to Gil-galad with his letter. Really? That's your response? An attempt to escape suspicion? That, oh well, it was because you lied? In what way does that equal the king being greedy? Also, if you knew this going in, why didn't you tell Celebrimbor not to send the letter, because otherwise it would affect the process? That's a question he doesn't ask, because obviously he doesn't, but if he did, that would break Sauron's terrible lie. He goes on to advise him to go to Lindon and admit what he's done, or matters will get worse. I wonder what Sauron would do if he did take that advice, because that would obliterate his plans. When Celebrimbor brought Sauron the news of King Durin, it honestly would have been better if he just said he knew nothing about it. Although, the better option would have been to not let the ring corrupt him, and that would have avoided all of this suspicion, but then again, you're retarded.
He would never permit me to forge anything again.
It is either that, or we plunge straight on.
How can you go from go to Lindon and confess to now let's plough on when you just said it would make matters worse if he didn't? Literal alarm bells should be ringing in Celebrimbor's ears when what he understands to be Anatar's motivation has just been contradicted. He came here saying he wanted to save the races of Middle-earth with rings of power, which, if in fact true, then he would force Celebrimbor to go to Lindon, otherwise he won't save Middle-earth but in fact make it worse because the process will still be affected. And you know the way to stop that from happening, which you've now disregarded. And of course, Celebrimbor doesn't realise that. He's more worried about his job at the moment rather than the harm he's caused. So we'll have to wait and see what he decides to do. We're then taken back to Khazad-dum, where Durin confronts his father, telling him about his visit to Eregion and his belief that there's something wrong with the rings and they shouldn't use them. King Durin, being the crazy fucker that he now is, doesn't respond to what Durin said, and instead goes on to say that time and pressure can shape a dwarf, and he had hoped their estrangement would help shape Durin. Not very fatherly, is it? He continues that he didn't realise how much it would shape himself and that he's proud of Durin, because his desire to partner with the elves saved their kingdom, although that's not what happened. Durin warned you he didn't trust the rings, where we had no insight from the king himself because we had to speedrun him to Crazy Man. The king decides that he finally wants Durin by his side going forward.
Prince Durin.
And Durin returns home a prince. Which now means, because Durin has seen Shiny Thing, he's completely forgotten about all the problems caused by the ring. First of all, his father's gone absolutely fucking mental and out of greed ignored the fact there's a Balrog in his mountain that's gonna kill them all. That's if he doesn't starve his people to death after raising taxes by 100%. And the people of Khazad-dum are people we were led to believe Durin cared about. He's now thrown that aside, not only because he's a spineless little bitch, but because he saw a shiny object to put around his neck. So I think it's fully safe to say Durin has been completely destroyed this season. The first step being when he had second thoughts about saving Elrond, which is not a thought Durin would ever have. And now we have this, where he decides to risk all those dwarven lives just so he can be prince again.
I tried to tell him.
No, you didn't try. All you said was, the rings are evil and we shouldn't use them. And you said that to the person wearing it that you know is affecting him as if he'd listen, so you didn't try anything. You didn't try to take the ring away from him, and if that didn't work, chop his fucking finger off. Which again, with what's at stake, that's an action I can believe someone doing. There's a fucking Balrog downstairs that's going to escape because of this crazy man. But Durin did nothing. There was no "I tried." Deezer makes him swear that he'll never wear one of those rings, which he agrees to, and that's that. So I guess they're all gonna die then. We then cut away to Eregion to find Celebrimbor, who's decided to continue his work with the rings after all. He hasn't put the pieces together that Sauron is now getting what he wants. We started this episode with Celebrimbor aware that Sauron was manipulating him and didn't want to make the rings for men, and everything that's transpired across the episode heavily indicates that it's all worked in Sauron's favour. But yet again, Celebrimbor has been oblivious when he knows Anatar has been manipulating him. So this end result should lead him to be even more wary of Anatar, but the script has forced him not to be, even when he's supposed to be highly intelligent but is in fact a dumb motherfucker. He also hasn't realised that if the work continues, it'll still be under the influence of deceit, because he hasn't yet confessed his lies to Gil-galad, which Sauron originally told him to do and Celebrimbor believed. So why won't he just do that, come back and continue so as not to make a bad situation worse? If he goes on to make the rings for men, they'll be the next ones corrupted. He's well aware of this. But the writers seem to be hinging all of this on the fact he's scared of being fired, which doesn't make any sense when he set out to make the rings to save Middle-earth. That tells me he would rather lose his job than do the opposite of what he intended. Instead, he's decided to make the situation even worse by scolding his workers and accusing them of hubris and sloth, and that it's their fault the Dwarven rings failed. He believes by lying to Gil-galad it affected the process, so then why the fuck have you just told another lie? Again, you're going to affect the process by doing that which you already believe you've done. Medania tries to defend herself, saying the designs were carried out to the most exact detail, although not really because you don't have gold and silver from Valinor. Celebrimbor goes on to say that to atone for their mistakes, they must complete the rings together, and the 9 rings need to do a lot more than aiding men, they must bring balance to the entire project.
They must draw strength from the 3 and somehow redeem the 7.
If you're already concerned that men are easily corrupted, then why would you give them more power to harness? Surely it would become more likely of them to be corrupted. I guess not. And how exactly are you going to redeem the 7 Dwarven rings without confessing to Gil-galad? That is what you've been told to do by Sauron. He told you that was the only way to redeem the 7. He hasn't even considered he could just discard the 7 Dwarven rings and reforge them from scratch, which would mean deceit is no longer affecting the process. He won't, for some reason, explore these possibilities because surely it's easier to confess to Gil-galad or make the rings from scratch than it is to, in your words, somehow redeem the 7 off the back of the 9. How are you going to do that? We don't know. He finishes off by saying they'll be working day and night with new designs, alloys, and an entirely new process. And if they offer him anything less than their utmost effort, they'll be Smiths of Eregion no longer. He walks away to his office to have a little cry while Sauron explains to them why he seems so unreasonable. The reason he gives is that Celebrimbor knows how much depends on the success of the rings. We then cut away to see that the orcs have finally reached Eregion, appearing on a hill above the city, which isn't a great idea when the elves have supervision and would clearly spot this army outside its walls. They of course won't until it's too late because that would give them time to prepare, and the writers can't allow that, can they? And that returns us to Lindon, where Elrond has finally arrived, although he may be too late. He tells Gil-galad about the army of orcs marching on Eregion, and they need to send an army straight away.
I have reason to believe that Sauron is the architect of all this.
Yeah, we already knew this. Where the fuck have you been? It also seems Gil-galad listened to that retard after all and sent his army to Mordor instead of Eregion, even with the information he had, regardless of his ring. The suspicious letter he received from Celebrimbor should have convinced him to send an army to Eregion, a place which is much more important to defend. Which is what Elrond tells him, that Eregion is the very jewel of Elvendom, and if it were to fall, it would be a mortal blow to Middle-earth. This is something Gil-galad should be well aware of. He is the fucking High King after all.
Our armies cannot defeat both Adar and Sauron, not alone.
So you don't have anyone else. You actually sent them all the way to Mordor. What a fucking idiot. We finally cut back to Eregion in the Orc camp where Galadriel is brought in and freed from a cage. And just before Glug can kill her, Adar stops him. He didn't think to tell his right-hand man that he didn't want her dead. And Glug wasn't smart enough to figure out that if they wanted her dead, why would they bring her all the way here? But it was lucky Adar showed up in time or he wouldn't be able to give his proposition. So nobody thought to check her for weapons. And what is her plan after she kills Adar? She's gonna die herself? Something which I wouldn't be opposed to.
Just kidding, but not really.
But Adar quickly tells her he didn't bring her here as a prisoner, but a potential ally, due to them having a common enemy in Sauron. Did I not say she'd be perfectly fine? But that brings us to the end of episode 5, which means we'll have to wait and find out what exactly Adar's proposal is. And with that, we should probably go over the events of this episode where the writers have suddenly now realised they haven't got long left. Which is why we've ended up with this rushed mess of an episode. So let us start with Numenor, where we finally get to see the effects of Pharazon becoming king, and he isn't off to a great start. He's decided to let his fuckwit son deal with those who remain loyal to Miriel and the faithful, by first of all stripping the Sea Guard of their ranks when these are people who recently fought in Middle-earth on behalf of Numenor. And we've went over the numerous reasons why this is a stupid thing to do when all the Numenorians wanted was for Miriel to be dethroned. The soldiers did nothing but their jobs, so you don't have a good reason to fire them, at least not something the public would accept. And why would Pharazon want to when, as has already been mentioned, he has a way with words, so surely he'd be able to persuade them out of supporting Miriel, which then provides him soldiers, but instead he's gave his opponents an advantage. Because who the fuck do you think these people will fight for now? Miriel. Kemen then decides to make a bad situation worse when he condemns the shrine in a not-so-calm manner, resulting in your guards beating innocent people and Valandil getting murdered in the middle of a funeral to honour the people who died, the main reason people were angry in the first place. Now that's some bad publicity, and should automatically turn people against Pharazon, which I'm going to assume it won't because we're dealing with Rings of Power. It's highly unlikely we'll ever get the perspective of your average citizen. They just exist to go along with whatever the script wants them to go along with, rather than explore the differing perspectives. So I imagine when we return to Numenor, the people will be perfectly fine about what happened when they really shouldn't. It's just complete incompetence on Pharazon's part, regardless if he told Kemen to do this or not, he still gave his retarded son this authority. In the space of a single episode, we've already blown through the faithful being oppressed when it should take a lot longer. We then have the Khazad-dum plotline where King Durin acquires his Ring of Power, resulting in the sunlight returning and the king quickly losing his fucking mind in the space of one episode. So the opportunity to explore someone being corrupted by power, a major theme of your show, has been completely discarded in favour of he's just crazy now. And the reason for this is to conveniently benefit Sauron, which he had no idea would happen. So the king must be crazy as quickly as possible, otherwise it affects the Eregion plot, and because of that we've lost out on a character. When his brains melted so quickly, leading him to tax the shit out of his own people, holding the rings hostage and ignoring restrictions he set himself in order to reach the gold beneath them.
I love gold!
Eventually, the Balrog is discovered by Disa through sheer contrivance, with the typical lazy writer trope of, oh no, I dropped something that's gonna lead me to something very important. And when it's finally brought to the king, he completely ignores it, even though it's in his best interest to deal with it, so it doesn't prevent him from getting his hands on that sweet, sweet gold. Then we have Durin, who knows the ring is affecting his father, and as a result affecting the people of Khazad-dum, and does nothing. Except from saying, could you maybe, if you want, I don't know, stop using the ring please? As if this crazy bastard would ever listen. He could have made an actual attempt to avoid the risk of total annihilation, and he doesn't, which only deals significant significant damage to Durin's character, when we've been shown in the past how much he cares for his fellow dwarves, which he's now forsaken to become prince once again. And Disa is another character who's been somewhat damaged when for some reason she doesn't know how money works, and knowingly denies the shopkeeper his profits, which would help him feed his family. So not only is she dumb as fuck, she's also an arsehole. This entire plotline, mainly the king going crazy, only exists so that Durin goes to Eregion with this information, which conveniently benefits Sauron. Which I suppose takes us over to Eregion, which revolves around Sauron trying to convince Celebrimbor to make the rings for men, where it was confirmed he wasn't under any spell of Sauron's and just did whatever he said until this episode. This entire plotline relies on King Durin going batshit, which Sauron didn't account for when he should have. Sauron didn't know this would happen, and that's why he went to the trouble of manipulating Celebrimbor without this information until Durin came to Eregion. It was only that allowed him to trick Celebrimbor. But it doesn't make sense for Sauron to allow the king to be corrupted for multiple reasons. The first one being Celebrimbor becoming suspicious, who would then refuse to continue the work you need him for. The other reason is that the Dwarf Lords would see the effects the ring has had on the king and would put them off using them, causing your plan to fall apart. Which brings in the other aspect of men finding out about the rings and what they would do to them. Sauron's entire plan hinges on secrecy. So then why the fuck is he bringing all this attention to himself and his rings? Oh right, he's retarded. Then moving on to Celebrimbor, who seems to suffer the same issues, we have the lie Sauron's told him about the rings being affected after he lied to Gil-galad, which Celebrimbor believes even though he knows Sauron's manipulating him, and tells him the only way to redeem the Dwarven rings is to confess to Gil-galad or not, when he just told him that was the only way to redeem them. Celebrimbor decides not to confess his lies and continues working under the influence of deceit, meaning what he believes to be the problem with the Dwarven rings hasn't been fucking fixed. You're only going to make it worse with the rings for men, and even more so when you lie yet again to your workers. So Celebrimbor continues to be an inconsistent, confusing mess of a character. And finally, we have a brief time in Lindon, the purpose of which is to bring tension by Gil-galad sending his army the wrong fucking way. Even though he had the suspicious letter from Celebrimbor which indicated Eregion isn't safe. He decided to listen to this fucking idiot who wanted to invade Mordor over protecting Eregion, which is more important. Gil-galad ultimately sending his army to Mordor is only possible because this twat had no spies in the area, even though 3 episodes ago she did. But then again, if spies were there, then they'd know the orcs had marched towards Eregion, and then we couldn't have our tension, could we? So overall, I think this was easily the worst episode so far because they were trying to rush through so many things at once, which just left us with non-stop problems. And why do I get the feeling we still haven't reached rock bottom? I guess we'll have to wait and find out, but for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.